On Good Friday. Welcome back to Early Start. I'm Dave Briggs.
Nice to see you all this morning. Welcome, everyone. I'm Christine Romans. It is Friday, April 14th. It is 5 a.m. in the East. This morning, the damage assessments are coming in after the U.S. military's biggest non-nuclear bomb was used in combat for the first time. Officially designated the Moab, the nickname of the mother of all bombs. It was dropped in eastern Afghanistan against ISIS fighters. The Afghan Ministry of Defense announcing overnight 36 ISIS members killed, 3 tunnels destroyed, along with weapons and ammunition.
But in an unusual twist, the commander-in-chief won't say for sure whether he gave the command for the strike.
Did you authorize it, sir?
Everybody knows exactly what happened. And what I do is I authorize my military. We have the greatest military in the world, and they've done a job as usual. So we have given them total authorization, and that's what they're doing. And frankly, that's why they've been so successful lately. If you look at what's happened over the last 8 weeks and compare that's what really to what's happened over the last 8 years, you'll see there's a tremendous difference.
So if the president did not give the order, who did? CNN national security reporter Ryan Brown, live for us in Washington. Good morning, Ryan. It's not entirely clear here if the president knew of this exact military action, is it?
Good morning, Dave. No, it's not. And I think one of the issues is here that this weapon, this Moab bomb, had been requested by the commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, General Nicholson, for some time, and actually he was authorized to use it by his immediate superior, General Votel, the commander of U.S. Central Command, before Trump's administration was even inaugurated. So this had been in the works for some time. Now, we do believe, we are told, that President Trump was briefed that this bomb was going to be used, but the authorities to use it had been delegated kind of down the chain of command for some months now. So this is a 22,000-pound bomb. It's never been used in combat before. It was developed during the second Iraq War in the early 2000s, and it's so big that it actually has to be dropped out of the back of a C-130 cargo transport plane via parachute. And again, the initial battle damage assessments from the Afghans are coming in. I think the U.S. is still waiting to region, Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, Pakistan, Taliban, former deliver against this complex series of tunnels and fighters.
Certainly came as a big surprise, the intelligence community and military analysts. Thank you, Ryan.
Okay, so why use the bomb now? And what signal does it send to allies and adversaries around the world? Joining us now, senior international correspondent Nick Payton-Walsh, live from Iraq. Good morning, Nick.
A clear signal, perhaps, that munitions and the sort of technology that's been off the table for quite some time is now in play, perhaps. And this comes at a very key time in the deteriorating security situation in Afghanistan. Frankly, the worst it's been since the US first invaded. Remember, 16 years ago. We're still the United States in that war. Now, the Taliban have been gaining a lot of ground, taking key towns that you haven't really heard about in the news, but they've been moving fast forwards, and about half the country now either contested or controlled by that insurgency. ISIS, a whole separate problem. They're exploiting a disillusionment with the Taliban, the fact that some young fighters are bored with the Taliban's behavior, its branding, seek the sort of newer, fresher face that ISIS provide. ISIS-K standing for Khorasan, the K, and that's sort of historically the area of Afghanistan and Pakistan that they would like to see in their hands. Some say, in fact, even ISIS came across the border from Pakistan when it first infiltrated that sort of remote mountainous part in the east, some of the toughest terrain in the world, frankly, Achin being the epicenter of where it all began. ISIS have lost territory there in the past to the Afghan army, being heavily damaged by drone and coalition airstrikes too, but they've regained ground quite substantially in the past months or so, even behind some attacks in the capital, Kabul. Back to you.
All right. Nick Payton-Walsh for us in Erbil. Thank you for that, Nick.
All right, to help us break it all down this morning, let's bring in CNN military analyst, retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton, a former member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He joins us from Washington. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Dave. How are you this morning?
We're good. We're a little bit confused.
The amount of force that you need in order to get the job done. Structure or the kind of terrain that we're dealing with, and there's very little other weapon, there are very few other weapon systems that could actually
Ops teams really getting in there. I mean, you want the intelligence that you can gather from an ISIS training camp or an ISIS camp in the tunnel system like that. But if you can't get in there, there could be loss of life. This is your only option?
It's one of the few options. Another way to do it, of course, in order to avoid that loss of life, is to find all the entrances and, in essence, mine those or booby trap those. But that would be a very inefficient way of doing business, and this is certainly, from that standpoint, a very efficient way of doing it, and it, in effect, closes off all the entrances, and it also forces the ISIS fighters into a certain position. Either they are going to be eliminated by the blast itself, or they are going to be forced to abandon the facility. So either of those outcomes is certainly a good outcome for the U.S. and its Afghan partners.
In the initial aftermath of this, Colonel, the first question people were asking is, did President Trump give this order? Sean Spicer punted on that, and then the president himself, we just played a short time ago, didn't really answer the question if he gave this order. Are you surprised by his response?
Well, I think he could have probably said it in a bit of a more artful way, but the way it is normally set up is for the president to approve the broad concept of operations like this, and especially if a different kind of weapon is being used, he should certainly be informed of that. It sounds like he has given a broad delegation of authority to Central Command, and then Central Command has in turn done that to the commander in Afghanistan, General Nicholson. And the fact that they did that shows that the president, of course, seems to have a lot of confidence in his troops, and that's a good thing. You know, in the military, we always talk about the 6,000 or 8,000 mile screwdriver, depending.
Issues happening in different countries around the world, but all taken together.
To adversaries, and in some ways it's reassuring to allies that there's going to be massive firepower backing them up and backing up the U.S. So what you're dealing with here, I think, is a message, whether it is intended or not, it is still a message to countries like North Korea, to Syria, to ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and to any other rival that we have, not to mention Russia, of course. And that is, I think, one of the key aspects to this. It, like I said, may not be directly intended, but it certainly has that effect, and sometimes effects are more important than intentions.
Colonel Cedric Leighton, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you. Great analysis.
Yeah, and we'll stay on that subject when we come back, because the president promised not to be the world's policeman. More on how the Moab bombing fits into that plan. Next.
President Trump keeping his promise to bomb the something out of ISIS, or words to that effect. I won't say heck, but
bleep.
Snot.
Yeah.
The snot out of ISIS. Just one day after he reversed course on 3 other major policy planks, helping us figure out what all this means. And the rest of the day in politics, Michael Warren joins us, a senior writer at the Weekly Standard. Good morning. Welcome aboard. All the best people come on at 5 a.m., I got to tell you. And this is the best time to be on TV. Nice to see you. So let's talk a little bit here about the president's foreign policy, right? What is the president's foreign policy? You know, he's dropped this big bomb in Afghanistan. There has been missile strikes in Syria. A carrier strike group is steaming toward the Korean Peninsula. What do we know?
Well, one problem in sort of figuring this out is the administration in the White House is sort of selectively forthcoming about what information. That Syria strike last week, the administration, you had Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, out very quickly with information for the press, talking with reporters, getting it out to the public. This strike in Afghanistan, less so, and maybe that's reflective of the different natures. I don't know if it follows on campaign promises, but I can tell you that the administration, from the very beginning, from January 20th, has been putting together a strategy for rethinking its North Korean policy. They've been bringing in a lot of different voices within the National Security Council, other parts of the national security parts of the government. And so this is something that has emerged as a very important issue for the Trump administration. So whether or not it's intended as a message, I think this is part of a larger strategy of sort of changing that message from the United States vis-a-vis North Korea. You're seeing it in a lot of the interactions with China and President Xi.
Right.
Some economic sanctions or effective economic sanctions happening there between North Korea and China that I think the U.S. government would like it to be perceived as a part of the U.S.'s pressure on China and North Korea.
But, you know, I would put China in that category of flip-flops from this president this week that has been so fascinating to watch. You know, he said on the campaign trail again and again that he was going to label China a currency manipulator. He was going to, you know, right away he was going to get back at them for all of their trade shenanigans. And then, you know, he sat with President Xi for 10 minutes and said, you know, gosh, it's a lot harder, the North Korea problem, than I thought it was going to be. And today in the Wall Street Journal, on the front page of the Journal, really interesting story about Trump's reversals reflecting more business influence. That's a Washington Post editorial. That's not what I'm talking about, guys. I'm talking about this story in the Wall Street Journal saying that it's the business folks around Trump that maybe are helping him and advising him, and that's why you're seeing these U-turns on policy. What do you think?
Possibly. I mean, you know, this happens, I think, to every president comes into office and they learn new things, they get new information, and a lot of their policy positions change from what they were during the campaign. This president just seems to sort of wear those changes a little bit more on his sleeve than most, perhaps. But I do think there is a change in influence, and there is an internal debate as well, not just on the foreign policy and national security, but economics as well. There is a debate among folks like Gary Cohn at the National Economic Council and more sort of tough on China folks like Peter Navarro, all in the West Wing. That's happening right now, but I think that sort of public debate is something that we're not normally seeing. We're seeing it in this administration, which I think reflects the lack of kind of a set ideology going into this White House.
Well, the Journal calls it the Kushner-Cohn ascendancy. Many feel that global Gary Cohn is a, quote, liberal Democrat. Not my words, the words of several conservatives. Are conservatives comfortable with the lessening influence of Steve Bannon and the increasing influence of Gary Cohn?
Well, these are a lot of terms that are kind of hard to define. You know, Steve Bannon does represent a sort of wing of right-wing politics within the White House, but a lot of more traditional conservatives would say he's no more representative of that than Gary Cohn and Jared Kushner, people who were registered Democrats until coming into this White House. There's not really much of a representative for the kind of conservatism that you actually see among Republicans in the House of Representatives. Right. So as Bannonism wanes and Gary Cohnism, whatever you want to call it, is on the rise, there does seem to be a lack of more traditional conservatism. Maybe that's where Mike Pence, the vice president, somebody not really talked about in these discussions, comes in and does have a representation.
Well, Mike Pence taking in a really immense role in the administration. I mean, he's the one on the weekends who's been going out there and,
the president's in Mar-a-Lago and Pence is in South Korea this weekend.
All right, Michael Warren, nice.
An Arizona high school football player making history, becoming the first woman to earn a scholarship at an NCAA school, Division I or II.
Good for her. Coy Wire has more in this morning's Bleacher Report. Hey there.
Good morning to you guys. I'm here at the Atlanta Braves brand new state-of-the-art stadium. More on that in a second, but we have to talk about this amazing accomplishment of Becca Longo, the glass ceiling breaking high school kicker out of Arizona. Becca only started playing football just a couple of years ago, and when she signed that letter of intent to play for Adams State University in Colorado, she was shocked to learn that she has done something no other woman has done before.
I was so emotional. I was just so grateful that somebody believed in me and that I could actually do it. I mean, I'm going to go in, I'm going to be ready to compete. I'm not one to back down to anybody.
Now, I spoke to Becca last night, and she had a special message for us to start our weekend. Check it out.
Hey guys, it's Becca here. I'm going to be kicked butt this week. And remember to set your goals high and never let anything hold you back.
Winning. Speaking of winners, Houston Texans' David Quesenberry is winning at life. He's been fighting cancer, and this week he finished his last chemotherapy treatment. And David was so excited afterwards that he rang the celebration bell so hard he knocked it off the wall. He posted this video on Instagram with an inspirational message saying, "Cancer didn't make him strong, love did." Go to BleacherReport.com and you can see the entire goosebump-inducing message from David. Now, there seems to be a bit of an arms race within pro sports stadiums. In the past year, we've had 2 NFL stadiums pop up, the Vikings and the Falcons. And within the next few years, we'll have 3 more teams with a new stadium, the Rams and Chargers in LA, the Raiders in Vegas. I'm here at MLB's newest stadium, SunTrust Park of the Atlanta Braves, where they went all out to create a great fan experience. You got to figure out a way to get people away from their 60-inch flat screens and to the ballpark. And as you can see, they have zip lining, rock climbing, any kind of food you could possibly imagine. And as far as technology, they have the fastest Wi-Fi of any stadium in the U.S., an app that can find you the nearest burger spot, frosty beverage, even a spot in line for the zip line you can reserve. The Braves have the Padres tonight at 7:35 Eastern. It's their first game in their brand new, beautiful home, and I am ready to rock, guys. Dave, I know you're a bit jealous. I wish you guys were here with me.
Well, Coy, it's 5:26 a.m. I recommend section 311. That's where Waffle House is located. It's breakfast time, man. Go get some waffles.
I love me some good stadium food. That is awesome. All right, thanks, Coy. Nice to see you.
Enjoy.
You're welcome, me too.
Okay, 26 minutes past the hour. Why wouldn't the commander-in-chief be the one to order the launch of the biggest conventional weapon the U.S. military has? Here with in force this morning. And Ryan, walk us through, I guess, the chain of command of deciding when to drop this bomb.
Well, good morning, Christina. This bomb, this Moab, this 20,000-pound bomb, it was a capability that was requested by the commander in Afghanistan, as General John Nicholson. He had requested some months in advance, we were told, and he was granted the authority to use it by his superior, General Joseph Votel, over at Central Command. So this had been in the works for some time, seeking this capability. Now this target of opportunity, this cave and tunnel complex in this very remote part of eastern Afghanistan, Nangarhar province, right there on the border with Pakistan, kind of emerged. So they kind of, what the military is saying was the right target, and they were looking for the right weapon, and the two things kind of converged. So again, we believe that President Trump was briefed of this weapon's use, given it was the first time it's ever been used in combat. But the authority to actually use it had long been delegated to the commander in the field. Again, we're still getting the battle damage assessments. The Afghans put out this one assessment, about 30 ISIS fighters killed. The U.S. is still waiting to make their assessment. We're expected to hear from General Nicholson in a press conference with the Afghan Minister of Defense very soon, so we might learn a little bit more about why this was used. But again, this all comes as Trump's administration is trying to figure out what its Afghan policy is going to be. General McMaster, his national security advisor, is expected to visit the country soon. The commander there, General Nicholson, has asked for more troops, in the thousands of more troops. Again, President Obama drew down the number of U.S. forces in Afghanistan by some 90%, and the security situation there has become a little bit less stable. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays into the future decisions by the Trump administration vis-a-vis Afghanistan.
All right, great context and details there for us. Ryan Brown at the Pentagon, thank you.
You bet.
So why use the bomb now, and what signal does it send to allies and adversaries around the world? Joining us now, senior international correspondent Nick Paton-Walsh, live from Iraq. Good morning, Nick. The mother of all bombs here, did it yield the mother of all results, though?
Not as far as we know now, and of course this is early days in terms of assessing the kind of damage a bomb like that would cause. It's going to be obviously very consequential, but the first assessment from the Afghan military is 36 dead ISIS militants and 3 tunnels destroyed. Frankly, it's about $300,000 per militant. Those counts will grow as the days progress. This clearly was a very hard to reach, very extensive ISIS camp. Achin itself, very rugged, hard to get into terrain anyway. And residents are in fact saying they don't believe there were many civilians in that area. But you've got to bear in mind, we just don't know at this particular stage. And obviously a bomb like that doesn't get to choose who it kills. It's quite so extensive. Residents, in fact, feeling the blast and feeling the dust of the explosion from kilometers away. But Achin has always been the epicenter of ISIS in Afghanistan to some degree. Nangarhar in the east, as I said. They've been kicked out of it by the Afghan army in the past couple of years since they emerged, but also come back with some force. US drones and airstrikes often targeting that particular area, but ISIS still moving forwards. A lot of them harnessing disillusionment with the Taliban insurgency and getting new recruits from that, but also from Afghanistan's beleaguered youth. And they do have a reach into the capital now behind some pretty substantial attacks in what used to be the sort of impenetrable safe areas of Kabul. But ISIS themselves, obviously a big enough threat now in Afghanistan that a munition like this was considered on the table for tackling them.
Still came as a surprise to many. Nick Paton-Walsh live in Iraq for us. Thank you. We are expected to hear from General John Nicholson, commander of the U.S. forces in Afghanistan. We'll bring you that as soon as we have it.
So let's bring in CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton, a former member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's in Washington for us, and you've been listening to our analysis and our reporting out of this Moab bomb. And, you know, some are trying to look at, see how this fits into President Trump's worldview and his foreign policy. And then there's a lot of questions about, well, did he personally sign off on this in the first place, or was this something that was long in the works? What's your assessment about whether that even matters?
Well, good morning, Christina. It does matter to an extent in that you want to know how involved the president is in these decisions, but there's also a way in which, it's good for the president to delegate his authorities to the people in the theater, as long as they provide the effects that are desired. So in this particular case, I think a big decision was made a while back that was we need to eliminate this particular ISIS area, this ISIS encampment. The only way to do it was to use this bomb, the Moab, and in order to use that Moab, of course, a lot of planning had to go into that. They had to make sure they had the right target set, that they avoided civilian casualties, and that they did the kinds of things that you do when you're using something new. And using something new, a weapon system, can have often unintended consequences. And this first operational use, it will be interesting to see how the assessments go, the battle damage assessments especially.
Sure, and some feel the president deserves credit for trusting, in this case, his military advisors and not getting stuck with the political quagmire. But let's talk about the proportionality of these results. We hear 36 ISIS fighters killed with the mother of all bombs. Is that proportionate in your view?
It is not. It is certainly not the mother of all results, and that would, of course, indicate that there is something that either was lacking in intelligence, or that ISIS really does have so few fighters, but possibly the only way to get at them was to use this particular weapon. So there are a lot of different aspects to it, but I think that when you look at proportionality, as Nick Paton-Walsh mentioned, these are early days. There There are certainly new elements to this. There will be more information coming out. And, if this ends up having destroyed an IED assembly point or an IED factory or a series of those, then it probably was worth it in terms of actually preventing casualties to U.S. military forces, Afghan military forces, and civilians.
Does it show a new engagement in the Afghan situation? I mean, under President Obama, we've been drawing down troops, years, 16 years, of engagement in the region. Does it show a re-engagement by the United States?
I think it does, and the fact that Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, is going to Afghanistan as President Trump's personal representative to take a look at exactly what's going on there and to help devise a strategy that works both militarily and politically is significant. I think President Trump, my read is that he is impatient to get results, and in this case, a 16-year-long war is a really long war, and that is something that needs to, in essence, come to an end. And to get out of a quagmire like this, but on our terms, is something that is certainly a desirable end state.
What signal does this send to the North Koreans, who some expect a 6th nuclear test on Saturday?
Well, I think it sends this signal, and again, whether it is intended or not, it shows that the United States is willing to use massive amounts of force, even newer weapon systems, to go after regimes or groups that it considers to be dangerous to it or to its soldiers. So this becomes a key element in this, and it does put people in North Korea and other potential rivals on notice that they are at risk, that there are things that could happen if they go ahead with things like that 6th nuclear test, which is a good possibility for North Korea in the next few days.
Sure.
If that happens, then there could very well be something that the United States tries to do, or they may just have tried to send a message saying that this could happen to you, and it depends on how they want to actually execute this.
Mm-hmm. All right, Colonel Cedric Leighton, thank you so much for your analysis this morning. I'm sure it'll be a busy morning for you. We'll be waiting for that press conference today as well, any minute, actually. Thank you. All right, signs of a new brain trust at the White House with Steve Bannon under increasing pressure. Is a new moderate voice bringing the president to the center?
Senior writer at the Weekly Standard. Good morning to you, Michael.
Morning again.
So let's take into account the president, the missile strikes on Syria, the stark warnings to North Korea ahead of what could be a 6th nuclear test, and now the dropping of the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan, ISIS fighters there. What then is the Trump foreign policy as you see it?
Well, it's a bit of ad hoc, catch as catch can, and trying to figure out how to respond to events. You certainly saw that in Syria, right? The chemical attack by Bashar al-Assad sort of prompted the president to act in a way that differed from the kind of rhetoric that he had during his campaign. I think it shows in many ways the sort of fluidity and malleability of his foreign policy, as well as the influence of a lot of what detractors might call the deep state, but really the sort of foreign policy establishment, whether it's from the Pentagon, the intelligence community, the sort of foreign policy and diplomatic establishment that is sort of teaching Donald Trump a lot of lessons about the way things work.
It's so fascinating to me, too, to see how the sphere of influence around him has been changing. I mean, that always happens with a new administration. You know, there's this jockeying for power and influence in the West Wing. But front page of the Wall Street Journal today has a great story about how Trump's policy reversals we've been talking about for the past 24 hours are a reflection of the business influence. You know, he's got all these people around him, Gary Cohn, for example, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and then these business leaders who he talks to who seem to be pulling him toward the center. Do you agree?
Yeah, I don't know how much of a shift it really is. There's sort of two different sides of Donald Trump. There's the economic nationalist populist side that's sort of represented by Steve Bannon. But remember, Donald Trump also promised to bring in the best people. And he comes from a sort of appreciation of business. You can see this in several members of his cabinet, including Steve Mnuchin, a former Goldman Sachs executive at the Department of Treasury. And so I think that this is the sort of other element of Donald Trump respecting that business acumen from folks like Gary Cohn, again, another Goldman Sachs person, as well as the influence and advice of his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the 36-year-old husband of Ivanka Trump, who's is really emerging as the most important advisor to the president.
An interesting quote in the Washington Post this morning from Sam Nunberg, who's a strategist on Trump's campaign. He says, quote, "The Trump White House will always be held in suspicion when you have someone who's consolidating full economic power in the White House who's also a liberal New York Democrat. Conservatives may be pleased at the military action of the president. Are they nervous, though, to see that sphere of influence increasing by those perceived to be Democrats?"
Yeah, I think so. And look, this is a political problem for Donald Trump. He is struggling in the approval rating polls, something like 37, 39%. Not a good position to be in. Now, who is with him in that 37, 39%? It's his base. They really didn't elect, I think, the Goldman Sachs wing of the party, or certainly of the country's elite. So this is something I think Donald Trump's going to have to deal with. Now, I think we found that he can be a little mercurial in terms of who he's listening to advice-wise. And so while we're seeing this sort of the Bannon wing on the wane here, something else could happen. The president could simply decide that he needs to return to that base and give them a few bones to chew on. So I don't think this is necessarily a permanent shift, and it's certainly not reflected on all policy, certainly not on immigration.
Well, and there's a risk here. Let's be honest, because he was elected by angry working-class voters who responded to his pleas that he was going to get rid of the Goldman Sachs influence in the world. He was going to get rid of, the big Wall Street influence, and it was going to be about the little guy again. And there's no little guy around Donald Trump advising Donald Trump right here.
Well, I would say Gary Cohn, the National Economic Council director, would argue that he does come from that little guy perspective. He grew up working class in Ohio and sort of rose to the ranks. And I think there is a sort of message that somebody like Gary Cohn and others around him would make. But I think you're right in sort of the perception, the idea that Goldman Sachs or whoever Wall Street is having influence. This is what a lot of Trump supporters voted against when they voted against Hillary Clinton. But it just goes to show you that, again, this is a very fluid president who doesn't necessarily have underpinnings on every single issue ideologically.
And if you believe reports, he is singularly focused on health care legislation. He'll need conservatives to get that through the House. Michael Warren from the Weekly Standard, we appreciate it.
Nice to meet you. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys.
All right, time for a quick early start in your money. The U.S. stock market is closed today for Good Friday. Stocks fell Thursday after the news the U.S. dropped that bomb in Afghanistan broke. The Dow fell 138 points. Stocks have been down for a couple of weeks now, but for the year, the Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ are all still higher. There you go.
All right, top-level talks at this hour between officials from Russia.